So I am going to tell you all about our distributed, decentralized, democratized energy future, and I'll tell you a bit about Powerhouse. But first, I do want to make sure we're all on the same page as far as the solar stats, because they are changing so quickly. So if you do, please go into your email, find that link. We're going to do some live polling in the form of solar trivia. Your federal funding will not be determined based on your performance, but it is a really fun thing to do to engage. So raise your hand if you've already been able to sign in and you have it ready to go. Okay, great. Anyone need more time? Show of hands if you need more time. Okay, no problem. Also, I know the Solar Foundation that is an awardee couldn't be here. A lot of the data that you'll see comes from them. So in some ways it's good that they're not here, because I would have expected them to get all of the questions right. But we appreciate them for the data that they have provided. Also, after the trivia, I'm going to ask you to reflect on what you heard with somebody next to you. So as you go through the questions, as we go through the questions, think about what was most interesting and what stood out to you. Anyone need more time to sign in? Show of hands. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah. And if she does, she's probably not the only one, so take the time to sign in. Oh, you're already answering. Oh, good. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Question number one. There are 10 questions. Question one. In the US in 2016, solar jobs growth outpaced the overall economy by how much? 2 times? 8 times, or 17 times? And right now, majority is saying 8 times. Let's do another 10 seconds or so. I'm going to put my timer on. 23. Anyone else can report? All right. And if I believe this will show us the answer. If you said 17x, you are correct. Show of hands who said 17x. John Powers in the corner and around the room. Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, 17 times the overall jobs growth. That's pretty amazing. Question 2. In 2016 in the US, what % of energy generated in this state in California came from solar? 13%, 8%, or 3%? 13% is surging ahead. 8% is not too far behind. Oh, wow. We'll do another 10 seconds or so. Anyone else who wants to join in on that one? All right. If you were with the majority and said 13%, you're correct. 13% of energy generated in the state of California came from solar in 2016. All right, question 3. In 2016 in the US, what % of people working in solar were women? 12%, 28%, or 48%? And again, this data is thanks to the Solar Foundation, so thank you for making that happen. Do another 10 seconds. All right, majority said 28, and you are correct. I love the people that said 48, that's where we should be. But if you said 28%, you are correct. And as a follow-up question, which state has the highest percentage of women in solar? Vermont, California, or Massachusetts? Oh, Massachusetts is surging. Vermont. Wow, California, come on. How many people here are from Massachusetts? Show of hands. All right. Another 10 seconds. All right. If you said Vermont, you are correct. Where is the Vermont Energy Investment Corp? Could you raise your hands? Can we give them a round of applause for your state? We're trying to be like you here in California. All right, question 5. In 2016 in the US, 1 out of every how many jobs was created by solar? 1 out of 50, 1 out of 100, or 1 out of 500? All right, I think we're close to final numbers. Another for 1 in 50. All right. If you said 1 in 50, you are correct. 1 out of every 50 jobs created in this country was created by the solar industry in 2016. So how's that for making America great? All right. Question 6. PV installation costs have declined by what percent since 2010 for utility scale projects? 38%, 65%, or 77%? %38 would be impressive, but I know nobody's chosen that yet. We think big, yes, exactly. All right, majority is saying 77%, and if you did, you are correct. 77% PV installation cost decline since 2010 for utility scale projects. All right, another state-specific question related to those in the room, question number 7. Among the following states, which has the highest ratio of solar jobs per capita? New Mexico, Utah, or Rhode Island? Who's here from Utah? Oh, awesome. Wow, 26. Another 10 seconds. All right, you clearly know about each other's work because if you said Utah, you are correct. 1 out of every 692 jobs in Utah is in the solar industry. Can the people that live and work in Utah raise your hands? Let's give them a round of applause. All right, question 8. The number of solar jobs increased in how many states in the US in 2016? How many states saw solar jobs increase in 2016? I like this group. All right, if you said 44 states, you are correct. Pretty amazing. All right, question 9. What is the top metro area for solar jobs? The Boston area, the San Francisco Bay Area, or the Los Angeles area? Another 5 seconds. All right. Well, welcome to the San Francisco Bay Area. If you said SF, you are correct. And the last question, which this one is not specific to solar, but still very important. In which city are you most likely seeking therapy right now? Chicago, New York, or Washington, D.C.? Okay. D.C. is surging ahead. If you live or work in Washington, D.C., can you actually stand up and can we give them a round of applause? It's not easy times in Washington, D.C., and although I know most of you work with public organizations or nonprofit organizations and you're limited in what you can say regarding politics and elected officials, Powerhouse is very much a private organization and we can say whatever we want. So if you need me to be your frustrated voice, I am more than happy to tweet on your behalf. And I did mention that I'd ask you to reflect on the questions afterwards, so I'm actually going to ask you to turn to somebody near you, the person you know least that's close to you, and just take 2 minutes each to share what did you hear that was new or interesting or surprising to you, and then I'll get your attention after about 4 minutes. Go ahead. right, if you want to come back from the one-on-ones. Anyone want to share something that they found most surprising or interesting? Any volunteers? Or that your neighbor found interesting? Yes.
The Utah table finds it incredible.
It's a good stat. It's a really good stat.
There's been a lot of growth in it, but it's surprising dam lines.
Yeah. Highest, to be clear, highest of those 3 states. Per cap. Anything else that was particularly interesting or surprising? Yes.
It's fascinating to see that 44 states are seeing solar growth, and we know less than half of them have friendly legislative provisions. So
Good point.
the market is driving beyond policy.
Absolutely. Yep. Good point. Anything else? Surprising, interesting? All right. Great. So I'll tell you a bit about Powerhouse and our role in helping to enable this distributed, decentralized, democratized energy economy. And I'll start by telling you how we got started. So show of hands of those of you who are familiar with a black political commentator named Van Jones. Show of hands. Okay, great. So Van Jones does political commentary on CNN, but before that, he was an advisor to President Obama, and before that, he led a nonprofit organization in Oakland called the Ella Baker Center, and I worked with him there from 2008 to 2012. And while he was transitioning out of his short stint at the White House and into his role with CNN, he gave me a call and said, there's this startup out of Arizona that wants to pilot this crowdfunding platform to help nonprofits and community-based organizations in Oakland go solar, but they don't know anyone in Oakland, and it's just 2 guys, and could you help them get started? Could you help them get connected to their first customers? And I was like, well, who are these entrepreneurs? And he said, well, one of them is Billy Parrish, who led the Energy Action Coalition, which was the largest student activist organizations for climate solutions in the country. They led a 10,000-person student lobby day in DC. And I said, well, that sounds great. Do they have any funding? And he said, well, my buddy Prince, like the singer Prince who passed away last year, wants to put up $250,000 to put up half of all the crowdfunding capital that these first 4 projects need in Oakland. So when Van calls you with a great entrepreneur offering $250,000 from Prince, the only answer is yes. And so I worked with Mosaic on their first 4 projects in Oakland and was climbing up on roofs and helping close deals with their first 4 customers, all of which were nonprofits and community-based organizations who otherwise wouldn't have been able to finance these solar projects. And I loved it. And I saw the benefit that they were getting by having somebody who could help connect them to their first customers. And at the same time, my co-founder in Powerhouse, a guy named Danny Kennedy, was serving on Mosaic's advisory board as one of the founding board members. And he was also connecting them to their first investors, and he was even giving them free office space in his old office in Berkeley. And it was seeing the combination of customer connections that I was able to provide, the capital connections that Danny was providing, and the space that seemed like a formula for success, not just for Mosaic, but what if we could provide the same set of services for 5 or 10 or 50 or even 100 startups at a time? And that was the inspiration to start Powerhouse. So I went to Danny and said, I'm ready to leave my job full-time if you leave your job part-time, and we'll start this business that cranks out these kind of solar solutions, especially those like Mosaic that are addressing the soft costs, addressing the needs to reduce the cost of capital and access to data and design and financial and asset management. And so Danny is also slightly insane and was willing to go on this crazy startup journey with me. And so we launched Powerhouse in 2013. And when we started, we just had 2 startups with us. Mosaic was one, and a company called PowerHive is the other. And for those of you that are familiar with Mosaic, they last year raised a $220 million Series C round, and they just did their billionth dollar worth of loan financing, providing residential loans for the US solar market. And the other company, PowerHive, the first $1,000 into PowerHive came in the form of a giant check that we gave away at our very first hackathon. We do hackathons every year. And last year, PowerHive raised a $20 million Series A, and they are building and remotely managing microgrids and emerging markets starting in East Africa. So since those first 2 back in 2013, we have housed 43 startups and organizations. They have collectively generated $52 million in revenue. They've raised over $290 million in capital. They have created 386 direct jobs, and they've contributed to the installation of 240 megawatts in the US and around the world. And I hope that we're just getting started. So ultimately, our mission at Powerhouse is to make solar the most abundant and affordable energy form in the world in our lifetime. And we believe that we can do that by supporting entrepreneurs. According to BNEF, the Bloomberg New Energy Finance team, solar will be the most affordable way of producing electricity in many countries in the 2020s and in the majority of the world by the 2030s. By 2040, 60% of global power capacity will come from non-emitting energy resources. This transition is happening in our lifetime, and it's happening because of the work that you do every day and the collective impact that our work has together. So like Powerhouse, you're making this transition possible through business model innovation, through pilot programs, through innovative ways to make solar more accessible to people here in this country, but also around the world. So I'd like to dive into the distributed part of the distributed, decentralized, and democratized energy economy. Show of hands if your work is in the distributed side of solar. Okay, awesome. So more great stats from Bloomberg New Energy Finance. By 2040, there will be a $3.7 trillion surge of investments into solar alone, and $2.2 trillion of that will be in distributed systems. So somebody's making a lot of money. It's just a question of who, and what kind of impact will that work have around the world. As you know better than I do, energy is going from this centralized system of single producers and many consumers to one in which we all become producers and consumers of energy. And this isn't just for solar. I know the work in this room spans across electric vehicles and storage and distributed energy management. And in order to get there, we know that somebody has to take the early risk, and that's what we're all here for. It's not just the startup risk that we engage in every day at Powerhouse, but it's also the business model risk. It's the political risk, it's the pilot program risk that each of you are taking in your own way every day. And we know that we're most likely to succeed if we can reach everyone. And I know not everyone can live in the liberal coast bubbles of sunshine and unicorns that we have here in Silicon Valley, but that's actually a good thing, because this can't just be about climate change and 100% renewable energy and the Paris Agreement. It also has to be about energy independence and energy freedom and energy choice and national security and competition and innovation and all of the things that most of the country can agree on. So I'll give you an example of one of the startups in Powerhouse that is working towards this decentralized, this distributed and decentralized energy system. And it's a startup called Utility API. And just out of curiosity, show of hands if you are already familiar with Utility API. A few, okay. Utility API was started by a guy named Daniel Rossler, who grew up in conservative Lubbock, Texas. He went to the University of Texas, studied chemical engineering, got into software development, and came to an early Powerhouse hackathon where he was trying to build a system that would use customers, both homeowners and business owners' utility bill data to help show them how they could save energy. And he found that it was really hard to access that information. A few months later, he met Alina Lucas, who is co-founder in Utility API, and she had been working at PG&E, and she also saw firsthand how difficult it was for people to get access to their own utility bill data. And they teamed up to build Utility API, which provides energy companies with access to utility bill data so that they can offer clean energy solutions to their customers. When Utility API started with Powerhouse, and when we were the first investor in their startup, they had nothing but the idea. They didn't even have a prototype. But we believed in them and what they were trying to build, and now they have 9 people in the Powerhouse office working for them full time. They've raised over $1 million. They're about to raise another $1.5 million, and they're serving some of the largest solar and storage companies in the country. So if you are doing anything that requires access to utility bill data, Utility API is a great resource that I encourage you to check out. So next, let's talk about decentralization. Decentralization is not just happening in energy, but also happening in politics and in tech, and it has applications for the energy industry. Show of hands of those of you that work in politics at the local and state level. Thank you. I appreciate the work. So there's no doubt that over the next 3 years, 8 months, and 19 days, but who's counting, our public progress is going to come from the local and state level. It's going to come from you. I doubt that this is going to be a top-down approach. I think this is going to be bottom-up, and it's going to be because of the work that you are all doing. So that's on the politics side. In technology, the tech buzzwords of the year are now not just applicable to Silicon Valley, but they're making their way into the energy space. So words like machine learning and AI and natural language processing and even blockchain are starting to see energy applications. And you may have seen the blockchain project in Brooklyn. That technology is also being applied to emerging markets. And one of the startups that is in the Powerhouse Accelerator program now, one of the startups that we've invested in, is called the Sun Exchange, and they're using blockchain technology, which is basically an autonomous transaction processing platform. And they're using it to finance solar projects on commercial buildings in emerging markets starting in Southern Africa. So they've already put about a 5 kilowatt system on a school in South Africa. They just finished a 15 kilowatt system on a wildlife refuge. They did a 45 kilowatt system on a tire retreading factory, and they're about to do their first 200 kilowatt microgrid system. And all of the capital for these projects has come from people like you and me around the world who can make a 10% return for the next 20 years without any transaction costs because it's through the blockchain. And the co-founder and CFO of the Sun Exchange, a guy named Larry Temlock, who spent 25 years in investment banking, he worked for JP Morgan and UBS, woke up one day and decided he wanted to take his decades of experience in financial management and apply it to something that he felt like really mattered. And we're thrilled that they're doing the work that they're doing and really happy to be a part of supporting their success. To that end, given how important energy access is, I know our work in this room is mostly focused on the US, but absolutely has applications abroad. Anyone know how many people around the world don't have access to electricity? Like zero access? Just shout it out. I've heard anywhere between 1.3 and 1.7 billion people. And anyone know how many more have intermittent access? Any ideas? Another billion people who have intermittent access to energy and who are using diesel generators if they have it, kerosene lanterns if that's all they have, or nothing. So the opportunity here and the work that we do isn't just about improving our own lives and improving our own country, but it really does have international applications. So what does decentralization ultimately mean? Yes, it means cost savings, it means security of supply, it means cleaner air and water, but it ultimately means access to electricity for everyone. So lastly, let's talk about democratization, and let's start with the demographics of democratization. In 2050, over half of adults in the United States will be people of color. Unfortunately, the current makeup of the US entrepreneurial community does not reflect that diversity. The current entrepreneurial community in the US is 80% white and 65% male. I didn't even write this, but I have to share this. There are more CEOs named John in the United States than there are female CEOs in the United States. New York Times did a great piece on this if you want to look it up. Does anyone know what % of venture capital funding goes to female founders and CEOs? Any guesses? Just shout it out. 5%? Unfortunately, it's lower. 4%. And anyone want to guess what % of venture capital funding goes to Black or Latino founders? Guesses? John, 3? It's even less. Less than 2. 1. It's 1%. So that's the downer. Sorry for the downer. Here's the good news. At Powerhouse, 35% of our investments have gone into startups that are led by women, Black or Latino founders, and 50% of our investments have gone to startups that are led by women, people of color, or members of the LGBTQ community. And we're not just doing this because we think it's charity, we're doing it because it's profitable, because I don't know how many studies we need to see that show when women and diverse leadership is on boards and in positions of executive leadership, companies perform better and make more money. So as we work towards grid parity, which I know is what we're all trying to do, we're also working towards gender parity, and we're also working towards racial parity. Where's the team from Vermont with the 48% women? Awesome, thank you again for that great work at your state. And I hope that the vision of a diversified energy workforce is not just limited to a balance in the workforce, but also that executive leadership, the technical leadership, the board leadership that looks like the city and state and country that we're in. So beyond the democratization of demographics in solar, we're also working to democratize access to solar. And raise your hand if your work involves community solar. Okay, excellent. That's a lot of you. That's great. And so for those of you that are familiar, how many households in the US are applicable to put solar on their roof? They have the right, they face the right direction, shading, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, in like millions. Yeah. 60 million, a little bit, I've heard a little bit less, but yes, around there. I've heard 40. I've heard 40 million rooftops in the US that are a good fit to actually put solar on the roof. And anyone know how many households there are in the US? Renters, homes? Not more than 90 million? Louder. 100 million? I've heard 100, so 130 million is the stat that I have. 130 million households. That means there's 90 million households across the US that cannot access rooftop solar. And that's why I'm so happy to see so many of your hands, those of you that are working in the community solar space. Some estimates show that community solar will be bigger than rooftop solar in the next 5 years. And to give you an example from the Powerhouse community, a startup called Sunswarm, whose founder and CEO, a guy named Aaron Clay, who was born and raised in West Oakland, one of the cities in California that has the highest rates of asthma and cancer due to the Port of Oakland that runs through the West Oakland neighborhood day in and day out. He went on to become a lawyer and teamed up with his co-founder and CTO at a Powerhouse hackathon. His co-founder used to work at Chevron Technology Ventures and wanted to make the switch into renewable energy. And they teamed up to form a startup called Sunswarm. And Sunswarm is a community solar subscription platform that allows solar developers to post their solar projects when they're looking for off-takers, customers. And it allows those 90 million households across the US to access solar when they can't put it on their own roof. And so like you, they, in their own way, are democratizing access to energy. So I'll end with this. Whether you've been doing this work for a few years or a few decades, and whether you're new to the industry or been doing this work for your entire career, we're here now, and we're definitely in this together. It's not an easy industry. Whether you're in the public, private, or nonprofit sector, nobody in this room has an easy job, but I know we do it for a reason. And to get a sense of people in the room, show of hands if you have kids or if there's a kid in your life that you love. I'm pretty sure it's everyone. So we do this work because we owe them a chance to inherit a world that is not screwed. And that's why this matters. We have the privilege and the responsibility to do this work every day. And although doing this work is a privilege, access to clean air and clean water shouldn't be. So my hope is that when we look back at our careers and the work that we've chosen to do, that we can see this distributed, decentralized, and democratized energy future. So I'm really happy to be building it with you. I'm gonna take a bunch of time for your conversations and then questions, and then we can close. But with that, as we say at Powerhouse, thank you and power on. Before we go get into either pairs or teams of 3 and just share either something that was interesting, and my ego hopes there was at least one thing, but if not, that's fine. Most importantly, share a question that you have. Just one question that you may want to ask, you don't have to. And if you hear a question that you think is more interesting than your own, you could ask your person you're talking with if you can ask their question. And if you want to take about 1.5 minutes each, and we'll gather back in a few minutes. Okay, if you want to find a good spot to close the conversation that you're on. Anyone want to be the first to share? Okay, I didn't think I would have to do this, but I'm going to do it. If you can hear me, clap once. If you can hear me, clap twice. If you can hear me, clap 3 times. If you ever need to get a room quiet, that's definitely the fastest way to do it. All right, so please do share. I want to hear your questions, either your question or a question from a neighbor if they're comfortable letting you ask their question for them. And if you could, too, please introduce yourself before you ask your question.
This is not a question that we discussed at our table, but I'm from New Mexico. With our out of the country, what advice would you have to start powerhouses in other cities all across the nation?
Ooh, I love that question. I would love to talk more about that and how to do that in a systematic way. And with some of the national entities that are helping to coordinate. I just met with some of the DOE Sunshot team members last week to talk about how do we move this work forward for the next 4 years and beyond. And that's a strategy that I would be more than happy to talk to you and others about. To be honest, I haven't thought about national expansion yet. I think the past 4 years since we've started has just been building a sustainable and replicable model. We've gotten to the sustainable point. We're not quite at the replicable yet, but I think we could get there with the right partners. And I think people around this room, you are the right partners. I will mention that Powerhouse is a bit unique relative to other incubators and accelerators in that most other incubators and accelerators in the clean tech space are almost entirely government or university funded. Powerhouse is neither. We are able to operate entirely within the private sector as a for-profit entity. And that has really helped us given the leadership transition at the federal level. A lot of the other programs out there are trying to figure out what they'll do moving forward. And I'm grateful to be a bit insulated from that, but I also know across the country there isn't the same base of venture capital support and private sector support as there is in Silicon Valley. So I think it really would be place-based as far as the resources and talent in New Mexico versus Massachusetts or Vermont or Illinois. Please. Yeah.
So the U.S. Department of Energy is working with a network. U.S. Department of Energy is working with a network of incubators across the U.S. It's called the Incubated Energy Network. And so I think there's 13 incubators that are currently within that network right now, helping to build capacity for incubators to have expertise in the energy area. But I agree that there's a huge amount of work that can continue to be done. And so if you want to look up the Incubated Energy Network, then maybe we'll find someone in your region.
Hi, so in seeing all these very interesting other incubators, what one, or maybe 3, what one regulatory change, if you could wave your magic wand, would you make to release more innovation in our specific countries?
Oh man, that's a fun question. I mean, I do not claim to be a political or regulatory expert, so that's you in the room, but my sense is the subsidies that exist for fossil fuel relative to the subsidies that exist for renewables, you've heard of the Green Tea Party. It's like the Tea Party, but they kind of err on the sustainable side. They're just like, just get rid of all of the subsidies and let the market speak for itself, which if it did, we'd be at grid parity today. So that's the simple answer, but I'm sure many of you have a more nuanced answer, and I actually welcome your, if anyone would like to add to that, I'd more than encourage. I think the collective wisdom of a room is always better than the person speaking. I would love to hear yours, and anyone else. Anyone else want to, as far as if you could wave a policy wand?
Somebody from around want to take a stab?
So you look at the first page.
I guess the non-specific answer I would give has to do with the utility business model, or really long term. But I think we have to change regulation in ways that utilities, which already have a lot of political and community power, don't harm themselves and their shareholders by unleashing stuff that they don't. Because today they only make profits on the stuff that infrastructure that they own. We can change regulations so that we're focused on performance and services. There's lots of ways to do that. I think that would really unleash a whole lot more solar and other clean energy sources.
Agreed. And I'll add that our relationship with utilities is interesting. European utilities love us. Their venture funds come to us. They want to know what kind of innovation is coming out of Powerhouse. US-based utilities, we're still kind of working on those relationships, and in part because startups in Powerhouse have received cease and desist letters from US-based utilities, which that's when we know we're doing something right. Like, we should be that disruptive. But we got a ways to go on the US side, so I agree with you on that. Other questions or other thoughts on policy wand?
So I'm Mark from the National and I had a question. It was really interesting to see all these stats about how the solar market is growing, how many jobs are being created, and I feel like this discussion around the economy never really focuses on any of these types of statistics that we see. So is there a way that we can tell the story a little bit better that highlights some of these things, or that sort of shifts the conversation and kind of this traditional fossil energy sources and things like that? I mean, is there a way that we can change the conversation?
I appreciate the question, because we can all be doing the greatest work in the world, and if nobody knows about it, it can only make so much of a difference. And I know, for Powerhouse, we have as much of a social media presence as possible, because that is our way to disseminate to people who we otherwise wouldn't be able to reach. We've been able to connect with some celebrities that lean on the environmental side, who are willing to voice that message for us, knowing that their reach is so much better and kind of further than ours. I think it's really one of the greatest opportunities that we all have is to focus on the storytelling. I know we spend, in the opening, I heard that this idea of wanting to disseminate as much as possible, but really baking that into everything that we do and spending in some ways as much time telling the story, which I know we don't like to do because we're humble and we just want to do the work. But if we really want to have the kind of impact that we want, then I agree with you. I think getting that message out there, and I wish I had a magic bullet for here's the one kind of entity or resource to use for that. I will say, in this meeting with the Sunshot team last week, the success that the Sunshot team, the Tech to Market team, the DOE more broadly, anything related to the solar space, the Tech to Market program, the Solar Pathways program, has had so much success. And relative to the venture community, you're crushing it. You outperform venture capital by a long shot. And I want that story to be told, and it's not yet, or at least not to the extent that it could be. So I would like to think through how to better do that storytelling, especially in a accessible way that is, short form, 140 characters, 20-second videos, the kind of things that are going to relate to the kind of people that think climate solutions have to be done, which is, in part, there's a generational element to this, but I think reaching audiences that already agree with the kind of work that we're doing, but being able to show them the success stories of the kind of work that you're doing and the entrepreneurs in Powerhouse, I think that will inspire more and more people to do it. Yeah.
I'm David Hill with the EIC, and a little bit of a follow-on to that is that I think, in addition to the jobs numbers, it's the consumer numbers, and it's the mass market, both demand and acceptance of solar is something that's good. And the solar jobs aren't just the technical jobs, but the person who's doing the accounting people in more and more states are both consumers of and helping to produce clean energy future. And we just emphasize the miraculous nature of solar on the roof, and you've got wireless delivery of the energy source right to the consumer, and those types of things. Those mass messages will be more accepted once people feel they're part of this solution set that's evolving. So the consumer as well as the job side can really be lifted up, I think.
I totally agreed. And it reminds me of a startup in Powerhouse that's a Sunshot Catalyst awardee called Hot for Solar. We think they're going to change their name. But Hot for Solar has mapped 250,000 of the residential systems in the US. And they know when they were installed, who installed them, what hardware they used. And that data is incredibly valuable, not just to hardware providers and financiers and installation companies, but it's also valuable to advocacy organizations. I've heard for years now, friends and colleagues that want to start the NRA for solar, but we can't do that unless we know who has a solar system. And that's what Hot for Solar is enabling. So not just the market opportunity, but the political opportunity to unite people around something that they have a stake in, whether because it's on their own roof or because they work and it pays their bills.
So my name is Carl Rowder, I'm from Base Energy and Climate Center. So my question for you is, what's your favorite business model or two for getting at energy burden, high energy burden and low and moderate income customers, over 6% in a lot of households where that much of the household budget has to go to electricity, and solar is still somewhat of a premium. So what's the business model that's going to crack that nut and make low and moderate income customers solar consumers?
It's a great question. Having come out of kind of the green jobs movement and work with Van, initially that was all about kind of putting people to work and good paying jobs, which is an important part of this conversation. But to your point, it's not just about access to jobs, it's about the ability to be a consumer of clean and renewable energy too, and the ability to lower your bill in doing so. And so for those of you that are active on Twitter or want to be, I just posted yesterday a startup called Ohm Connect that's based here in San Francisco Bay Area, and they'll actually pay you to save energy. There's this loophole in the public goods surcharge in California and maybe in other states that will actually, you can, I got a check through PayPal or a payment through PayPal for $65.39 yesterday because I've been saving energy and because they've gamified it. And so I think it has to be fun, it has to be easy, you have to not only be able to reduce your bill but also get paid. That's one pretty creative solution that I'm really excited about, one that is also pretty contentious with utilities, and you can understand why. So that's one. As far as others that are kind of particularly focused on low and moderate income communities, I mentioned SunSwarm, the community solar platform that allows people to access solar even if they can't put it on their own roof. Another company that we invested in called Sunbank, the woman who built the loan program for Sunrun left to start this company called Sunbank, which allows people to crowd finance solar systems, residential systems, but in their own neighborhoods, and make a profit through small investments into those kind of community-based systems. So I think local ownership is a big part of this. So yeah, I would say that. Anyone, other ideas around low and moderate income? I know that's a focus of some of you in this room. Yes.
I feel like you guys are just setting me up for these. So we recently launched, in the past few months, our our Solar in Your Community challenge. And so we're going to be working with about 170 communities that are deploying solar projects that benefit either low and moderate income consumers or nonprofit community serving entities. So there's a lot of tremendous activity that's going on there. It's not all community solar in the shared solar sense, but nonetheless, a number of really interesting models that are there. One that we're kind of excited about is tied to something that she was talking about a little earlier. The Brooklyn microgrid is looking at using blockchain technologies so that low-income customers can make investments as little as $25 a month. And they can kind of get that savings snowball going where the more, once they save a little money, they can reinvest reinvest that into a larger share, and over time, it can go from, having a share of a quarter of a panel to a full panel to a couple of panels, and really start offsetting more and more of their electricity through these low-cost transactions. So I think that, I was just reading a really interesting article recently about how Walmart is starting to gamify work on using sort of lottery concepts to encourage people to save through the kind of Walmart debit cards that they make available. And so I think a lot of the innovations are in those financial services that can open things up and help people to start to achieve some of those savings.
Other questions? Yes.
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of VC financing landscape for kind of clean tech and solar. Where do you see these investments coming from right now? Where are the kind of major players? What kind of business models are they especially interested in? And kind of where do you see gaps in what we after living in these companies, but really see established and
Yeah, definitely. Also, could you introduce yourself? It's okay. Great. So yeah, the venture community, Powerhouse has built really strong relationships with the clean tech venture community and the venture community more broadly in the San Francisco Bay Area, but across the country. And so some of the big names and kind of players in the space and what they're up to, DBL investors, double bottom line investors, which early investors in Tesla, Nest, Solar City, but also a major investor in Off Grid Electric, which is one of the largest microgrid companies in the world. Obvious Ventures, the funding is provided by Ev Williams, the founder of Twitter. They invest in exclusively world positive companies, a lot of which are in the clean tech space. They were part of Mosaic's last big round. And then there's a lot of new spin-offs from bigger VCs that have partners that have kind of been with these funds for 10 years and are spinning off their own earlier stage practices. And that's something that I'm really excited about, given the kind of uncertainty from the federal level and a lot of venture capitalists who were in solar in the hardware days and then got burned and have left and haven't come back yet. People who are true believers in the space are starting to spin out these earlier stage venture funds, a couple in the Bay Area, one called Congruent Ventures, which is a spinoff of Prelude, another called Wireframe Ventures, which is a spinoff of Claremont Creek Partners. So I would say there's interest. We're hosting an event tomorrow with a dozen plus of the biggest clean tech VCs in the Bay Area, and they're coming because they want the deal flow and they are making investments. So I would say, similar to your work focused on soft costs, so is ours. We think that the greatest opportunity to expand solar access and adoption is by making the soft costs as low as possible to match the same kind of cost reductions that we've seen in hardware over the past 5 or 10 years. And ultimately that's what will make solar more accessible, but it's going to take the private sector, their capital and their investment dollars being put to work, and that's part of Powerhouse's role, is to find companies, some of whom have come out of the DOE Sunshot programs like Catalyst and the Incubate program, and then get them connected to their first investors. We joke that we're usually the first friend in a friends and family round, and then we connect them to other friends and family, but then also to more institutional investors. Yeah. Maybe one final question? No pressure. Yes? I am here just today, and my train leaves at 12:10, so I should leave here at about 11:45. So I'll be here for 45 minutes, and I'll just hang out in the back and would love to connect. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll close with this. I believe that perspective is the ultimate advantage, and I believe that we have a perspective that a lot of people in the country don't yet have. We are the true believers. We're early adopters. We're helping our towns and cities and states, and ultimately the country and the world, navigate this change. And it is our faith and our determination to succeed that is rooted not just in data, which I know we all believe strongly in, but also in the anecdotes and the stories of people who do have jobs in this industry and are able to provide for their families as a result of it, and the entrepreneurs at Powerhouse that are taking tremendous risk to build the businesses that are going to make this transition possible. I believe that you are lighting a path to this distributed, decentralized, and democratized energy future. And ultimately, I believe that solar doesn't just power our lives, but I believe that it is our greatest opportunity. So thank you very much, and power on.